Welcome back to the Middle of Culture. I am one of your hosts, Eden.
And I am your other host, Peter.
Peter, it is late February. We live in a failed state. How do you feel about life?
Well, as I mentioned to Aubrey when she and I recorded last week, I saw a video that I think perfectly sums up how I'm feeling. And it was a lady who was saying, I didn't F.A. Why do I have to F.O.?
You know, that's really relatable. I did not fuck around. So why am I suffering the find out phase?
Correct. Yes.
Oh, here we are.
We're all finding out, and there's a lot of us who did not do the fucking around.
Yeah, well, all we can do is care about each other. Okay, so what you been up to?
Work.
How's work been?
Working. It is interesting. There are a number of things that are going well, and there are a few things where I'm kind of like, I think some folks need to recalibrate some attitudes at work. But then some days I'm one of those folks who probably needs to recalibrate their attitude. So it's all right. Yeah. That's what I'll say. It's all right.
It's all right. Truer words never spoken.
Like it's like in that video I sent you. It's about getting a paycheck and keeping a gun out of your mouth.
You know, that is progress. That feels like progress on a day like today.
I mean, it sure does.
So what you been up to?
How about you?
The cold has broken.
Same thing.
The cold is broken. It's been in the 50s. All the snow has melted. There are muddy paw prints all over my house now. Thank you very much to the mud.
I believe that.
Been busy. Replaced our radon mitigation motor today.
Okay.
Because we live in radon country. One of the many reasons why I love to live in the failed state that is Iowa. We have a big pipe in the middle of our basement where a fan is hooked up to it all the time and is just pumping the cancerous gas radon out of our basement at all times because we live in radon country. And our old radon mitigation fan broke, and so we had to call a dude to come out and swap it out. It lasted for a decade, so it had a good run. But
That's good.
We got it. We got the radon mitigation going again, so hopefully we won't get cancer in our basement.
You got to mitigate that radon.
Truer words never spoken. What have you been up to?
So I still have not started Wind and Truth.
It's a lot. You gotta be in the right mood for 1,500 pages of some bullshit. Also, isn't this like the culmination of like two different bullshits?
Well, this is the end of the first cycle of the Stormlight Archive. So when Brandon Sanderson announced the Stormlight Archive and has been saying all along his plan is a 10-book series, but 2 5-book cycles. Okay. And so this is the end of the first cycle. It's going to kind of wrap up at least some of the storylines that he has been building to. Here's the thing. I used the fact that we had some other reading to do for tonight as an excuse to not get started.
Nice.
And the other thing, quite honestly, is, I get up 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. By the time I get home, we have dinner, maybe spend a little time with my wife and son watching a show or something. Reading just isn't, it hasn't been in the cards. So still waiting to start that one. I will get to
fair.
it.
That's real fair.
Probably this weekend, I will look at starting it. Haven't really been watching anything, no movies, nothing yet. You and I talked a few weeks ago about what we thought that Captain America Brave New World was going to be. Until just now, I kind of forgot that it had come out because it's been that inconsequential. And I was listening, I think the weekend it came out, to the Kind of Funny podcast, their review of it. And they said what I kind of expected. Now, the good news is they didn't say it sucked, but they said it was fine, but don't go see it in theaters. Just wait to stream it. And I thought to myself, perfect. That's maybe what I'm going to do. We'll see. Okay. Other than that, I've been listening to some new music. We actually did have a few albums come out in the last couple of weeks. A couple of which I had talked about on our What Are We Looking Forward To episode. So the new Affliction Vortex is the album from Dawn of Solace. It's great. It's good, kind of sad boy doom. But this one has a little bit more. So the guitarist of the band had been in other bands where he did some harsh vocals, and it had mostly been clean vocals on the previous 3 albums. This one has a little bit of harsh. Maybe it's only 2 albums. Yeah. So a little bit more of just kind of an edge to it, but still in that, little melancholy, melodic kind of bend that sometimes that's just what I'm looking for. The other one that came out that I have been really, really enjoying is Sleepless Empire, the new album from Lacuna Coil. It is not as good as Black Anima, their previous one, but that one was just, that one was a slobber knocker. I mean, after a number of albums that were kind of middling, that album was spectacular and got me back into them again. This one's not quite as good, but it is still very strong, very catchy. Christina Scabbia's voice is just awesome. And so I have been really, really enjoying that latest Lacuna Coil. And then a fun little 2-song, well, technically 4-song, but 4-song EP from my one of my favorite Greek bands, Septic Flesh. They released their Amphibians EP, so it's two traditional Septic Flesh songs and then 2 orchestral tracks. Again, Septic Flesh is fun. The guitarist, I think it's Christos Anuo or something like that. Antonio, I can never remember his last name. Anyway, I think he has a master's in music composition, and he writes all of the orchestration stuff, and then they actually record that with the Prague Philharmonic. So it's actual real orchestra that they record with. And so their orchestral stuff is really fun, very moody. It's kind of like think dark, spooky soundtrack sort of stuff. But their death metal is a lot of fun too, because the orchestral parts are essential. It doesn't ever feel like it's an add-on. It feels like the song was written knowing that the orchestra was part of the song. So I dig those guys. So that's been mostly it, other than I guess I did fire up the other night Avowed and played for maybe 30, 45 minutes. Enough to go, yeah, I'll come back, but not enough to... it hasn't hooked me at all yet. But it's very early. I recognize I haven't gotten out of the very first area. I'm still in I just barely picked up magic stuff. So again, it's very early, but we'll see. I don't know. It hasn't got any hooks into me, but I did start playing it a little bit.
Fair.
But that's about it for me. What about you?
Well, why not pick up where you let off? Avowed slaps. Avowed is a real good Obsidian game. These guys know how to make a good video game.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Here's the thing that I really like about it. I was very worried that they were going to be like, oh, well, we're moving from, the isometric CRPG Baldur's Gate style game to a more like, Bethesda inspired, first person exploration RPG. We're going to dumb things down in terms of the world, and we're going to make things a lot less weird. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you, my brother, they have not made things less weird. If anything, they have said, man, you know what's weird? Aora. What if we made it weirder? And that's great. I love that they have not been trying to sand the edges off of the extremely obtuse world that they have built in Aora. I think it's really interesting. I have talked at length on this very podcast about how much I admired Pillars of Eternity and the storytelling that it did and the world it created, and how I liked Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire even more because it took a lot of those ideas and moved them forward into a more interesting package, and that it did some of those things that I love that Obsidian does, where, I talked about how near the end of Deadfire, there was a place where I had to make a choice between 4 or 5 options, and all 5 of those options sucked. So I saved the game, and I went and I slept on it, and I came back the same day. They did it to me again. It wasn't 4 options this time. This is where it really shows that these games are too expensive when they go into 3D like this for a mid-tier, smaller studio like Obsidian.
Sure.
They only gave me 2 terrible choices I had to choose between instead of 4 terrible choices. But they were 2 incredibly terrible choices, both of which seemed like the absolute nadir of what I wanted to do. And there was no third option. It was, do you want shit sandwich A or shit sandwich B? Either way, you're getting a whole sandwich full of shit. Mm-hmm. And that is great, I think, because it complicates what so often happens in those, especially Bethesda-style games. Bethesda has never done that to you. Never in the world have you been presented with a moral quandary in a Bethesda video game where it was like, every bit of this sucks. You just get to decide how you would like the suck to continue. There is always the like morally righteous, obviously good, right choice to make in an Obsidian or in a Bethesda RPG every time. Fallout 3 had one of those. Fallout 4 has one of those. Every Elder Scrolls game has one of those. Starbound absolutely had multiple of those. Where it was like, okay, one of them is like, give this puppy an ice cream cone, and one of them is shoot this puppy in the head. I can't imagine what I want to do here. Obsidian just doesn't do it like that. And they didn't, I knew this. In my heart, I knew they were going to be able to do this. This is how New Vegas is. None of the choices are good in New Vegas when it's like, I have to figure out who I want to be in charge of the Mojave. They all suck. Every one of these choices sucks. It's just a question of what kind of suck do I want this world to be in? And they've done it again, and they've done it really well. I think the game is gorgeous. I think it's really stunning to look at. And
it does look very pretty.
The more you get away from that starting zone, the weirder things get. And the more, and maybe they should have front loaded that stuff, to be perfectly honest. Maybe they should have made that first area you're in a little stranger, because it's feels kind of just like fantasy world shit. And some of the later ones get a lot weirder and a lot more, just unexpected about it. But I do think it's very good. I can see the constraints of the game that they designed and the ways that they had to make concessions or compromises during the coding process and like during the creation of this game. Because originally it had been pitched as, hey, Obsidian is making a Skyrim, like it's going to be this big world that you can just go around in and fuck about like you can in Skyrim. Like, from the start of Skyrim, you can be like, I don't care about these dragons. I definitely don't care about these racist Nords versus the racist Empire. I don't care about any of these guys. I'm going to just fuck off over here. And you could just do that in Skyrim. And that was kind of the original initial pitch on Avowed. But that's not how it has turned out in reality. It's structured a lot more like their last big game, The Outer Worlds, was, where it is a series of interconnected maps that you can move between, but like each map is a decent sized map. There's a fair amount to explore and everything, but it's still kind of discrete in a way that, Skyrim or Morrowind or Oblivion are not, where it is just one big world you can walk around in.
Sure.
And I think that kind of works because they're then able to make each of these different maps quite different from each other. They're able to really lean into, these are different biomes you're going to on this, continent that you're on. And they have very different vibes because of it. And I think it works largely. And I'm liking the story a lot. I think they wisely scoped down because I want to say I've played 20 hours and I'm in the last zone pretty close. I feels like I'm pretty close to the end. And I've done most, if not all, of the side quests. And I think it'll probably end up being a 25-hour game, which isn't that dissimilar than Deadfire. Deadfire was like 25, 30 hours, I think, all told. This is not, again, a Skyrim where you can spend 140 hours. There's simply not that much to do in this game. But that's probably for the best, because I think that I'm going to get in, have a very good time, and then be done and be like, well, I don't think this is ever getting DLC, so I had a very good time. Thank you for letting me play your game, John Game Pass. But I'm having a really good time with it.
Good. I'm looking at howlongtobeat.com, and it does say main story 17 hours. It says main plus sides 34 and a half. Completionist somehow gets all the way up to 57 and a half, but that makes me think that your 25 hour time frame seems like a pretty good main story and much of the side quests.
Yeah. I don't think I've not done a side quest. I haven't done all the treasure hunts because I get treasure maps and I'm like, I don't give a shit about this. My gear is fine.
And
I'm getting through these fights just fine.
Comes in looking for all that bullcrap.
But I think it's good. And if you get the druthers for a pretty good sized RPG that looks very good, has really good voice performances, it's fully voiced and it's really, really well done. If any of you listeners think to yourself, you know who's one of my favorite companions in video games? Garrus Vicarian. I wonder what that motherfucker's up to these days. Well, he's here. His name's Kai. He's a Rawatai, and he's your first companion in this game, so go on adventures with the guy who played Garrus Vicarian. He still got it. He's still one of the great voice actors, so it's a really good crew. There are only 4 companions. It's not a huge group. Only 2 of them even have like companion loyalty quests. The other 2 are just like, nah, you kind of worked through the thing this person needed to work through as part of the main quest. Like they're with you now. It's good. It's really well scoped.
That's good to hear. That's encouraging. I was planning on going back to it. It wasn't something that I was going to, I certainly hadn't bounced off. It just hadn't pulled me in yet. But that encourages me to get back in, give it some more time, and really, dig into it.
I will say it's very fun to have a grimoire in your left hand, and every time you jump, watch the little pages go flap, 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 flap in your open grimoire so that you can cast some spells.
I just barely got the grimoire, so I haven't had a chance to jump with it yet.
I did eventually just unlock spells for regular and not have to have a grimoire, because then I can have a spear in one hand and a pistol in the other, and I can still shoot magic missiles, and then I can hit Y and pull out a blunderbuss and just like shoot dudes from afar. Why can you do a charged attack with a gun in these games? Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. If you hold the trigger for a while, the pew pew gets stronger. I don't know why. Metaphysically, that doesn't make sense. All I know is I hold the trigger down and guns shoot harder, and that's pretty fun.
There you go.
But I'm really liking it. I think it's really good. I'm excited to finish it up and hopefully get back to Indiana Jones, but I'm not sad that I put Indiana Jones on the back burner to play Avowed instead, because I think I'm enjoying it more. As much as I did enjoy Indiana Jones and was enjoying it, I just liked Obsidian's writing a lot better.
Cool. That's awesome.
Let's see. What else have I been up to? I finished a book. It was a book that my coworker actually recommended as something he had been reading and was kind of on the fence about, but it had a cute name, so I read it anyway. It's called A Bánh Mì for Two. And it's just this romance book about this, Vietnamese American exchange student who goes back, secretly goes to Vietnam, telling her parents that she's going to Singapore because she's trying to figure out where she came from and why her mom won't ever talk about Vietnam. And while she's there, she meets the person who wrote the food blog that she had loved for years, which it's a little unrealistic that anyone would give this much of a shit about a food blog, but don't worry about it. It's romance. But she meets the girl who'd been writing this food blog, and they start hanging out and trying to help each other. And it was quite sweet. I enjoyed it quite a bit. It was cute. It was very fast. It was one of those things where when I would wake up at 5:30 and didn't want to get out of bed yet because my wife and my dog were asleep in bed next to me, I would just pull it up on the Books app and read more of it instead of doom scroll. And I was pretty good for that.
Nice.
And then I tried to do that with a Jean Le Carré novel, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, and it was just kind of boring. And I don't know if I'm going to go back to it or not, but I'd heard so many good things about Le Carré and Jean Le Carré. I don't know how to say his name. It's got an accent, but I think people say Jean Le Carré. what the hell do I know? He's some British dude. He's probably not saying it with the French. Actually, to his credit, he renounced his British citizenship and became a citizen of Ireland because fuck the colonizers. So props to Jean Le Carré, however you say his name. But his book's kind of boring. So we'll see if I get back to it or not.
Well, like I say, one of my very favorite books of all time, The Gone Away World by Nick Harkaway. Nick Harkaway is his son.
Is he?
Yes.
I didn't know Nick Harkaway was John Le Carré's son.
Yes. So that is one of the reasons why one of Nick Harkaway's, and I'm doing a really quick search because he has a relatively recent book that was, let's see, is it Carla's Choice? Which is a George Smiley continuation novel. And
what?
George Smiley obviously is the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the spy who came in from the cold, that character of Jean Le Carré.
He has only been hinted to in Spy Who Came In From the Cold so far. It's been this other guy who I don't really care for. And I was like, where's George Smiley? He's the guy. Where's the guy? But, oh well.
Yep. So Carla's Choice came out 2024. It is a George Smiley continuation novel written by Nick Harkaway because he is Jean Le Carré's son.
That's wild. I remember you have always mentioned that you loved The Gone Away World, and I have started that book probably 5 times, and I've never made it more than like 20 pages in. I should give it a try again one of these times. I still have it. Every time I clean off my shelves, I keep my hardcover copy of it that I bought 15, 20 years ago at this point, because I'm like, I know Peter really likes this book. At some point I should read it, and I just haven't yet.
I did.
But at some point I should.
I really like it. It's one of those I keep thinking to myself, I need to go back and reread it. But then I tell myself, of course, no, you need to read Nomon, his 2017 book. That's one of his few books that I haven't read yet first before I reread The Gone Away World. But,
The thing about rereading is I always feel a little guilty about it, which we did a thing that I reread today for our main event, which we'll talk about. But I don't feel too guilty because it was a fast read. But it is always like, I could be reading anything on these very large piles of books behind me. I think I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I got 5 more books yesterday that got added to the pile. What am I doing? It's because my boss ordered them in for me and said, this seems like a thing you'd be into. And I was like, you know what? You do know me pretty well.
There you go.
Let's see, what else have I done? I did go see Captain America because we went as a field trip. As all of the people from the comic store, we went together. And the thing is, my expectations were extremely low. So I was like, it was fine. It's a solid 5 out of 10 movie. But you have to keep in mind, dear listener, I'm a harsh grader. So for me to give it a 5 out of 10, it's a mid movie. It's fine. It's good. It was fine. It wasn't great. It was fine. It was better than the last couple Marvel movies I feel like I didn't see or did see. I thought it was better than the first half hour of Quantumania before I turned that off because it was so god-awful boring. It was fine. It was kind of dumb. The Red Hulk looks stupid. It's dumb. They shouldn't have cast Harrison Ford in that role. They should have just got Sam Elliott back. Come on, guys. Yeah. You already had him play this character before. Just have him come through. You know who's cheaper than Harrison Ford and probably easier to work with? Sam Elliott. But
that's true.
Whatever. I can't. They're never going to put any respect on Ang Lee's Hulk's name. And that is a shame because that's one of the greatest comic book movies ever made. I firmly, in my heart, believe Ang Lee's Hulk, one of the greats, better than nearly every Marvel Cinematic Universe movie put together.
Still never seen it.
What? Okay, well, put that on the list of things to do for this podcast.
I knew that if I told you that I had never seen it, I was like, oh, they're gonna make us watch it.
Put it on the list. Ang Lee was one of the first people to say, what if you make a comic book a movie? And then was like, so it needs to still be like a comic book, dude. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. I think if you go in with this is an inventive experimentation with the medium, you'll have a very good time. If you go in thinking, hey, I liked Louis Leterrier's The Incredible Hulk pretty okay, you probably won't have that good of a time, but it's much better than that movie. It's much better than that movie. Anyway, yeah, Captain America was fine. The last thing I will mention, I've also been listening to music. What have I been listening to, you might ask? Oh, just weird music from 1960s Brazil.
Okay.
Been listening to a lot of Tenorio Jr. Been listening to a lot of Salambanso Trio, Joe Donato, like a bunch of just weird, like, samba music from the 60s. You know what was good? Samba music in the 60s. It's great. Y'all should go listen to it. Tenorio Jr. is extremely talented, and I've really enjoyed listening to that album, Embalo, over and over and over again for the last couple weeks. But that's kind of what I've been up to.
Excellent.
So I guess that means we need to get on to what we've been reading, because we read something for this podcast. And that is, we read the first 3 volumes of the shonen manga Akane Banashi. Peter, how did you find the first 3 volumes of Akane Banashi?
Last time we recorded, when we talked about Murderbot, you'd mentioned that it is included.
Pause. I forgot. My friend Anastasia brought this to my attention. Dear listener, Anastasia, hello. She brought this to my attention. Did you see Murderbot's being cast?
Yes.
Terrible.
Yeah.
They're not going to make it look androgynous enough. He's just going to look like a Skarsgård's son. It's just going to be a Skarsgård. Terrible casting. Terrible casting.
Very much.
Here's the thing. He's actually a pretty good actor. I think all the Skarsgårds are pretty good actors. They're good at action. They're good at horror. They're fine guys. But, like, I think he's just going to look like a guy. And I think that's going to make it worse than it would be otherwise.
Nope, you are correct. It's definitely, it's just a dude.
But apparently he really likes the series. He's one of the executive producers on it. He's one of the people who's, like, making this show happen. So okay. I guess you get to get cast in it if you're a big fan and you're trying to finance it. Okay, put yourself in the movie. It's fine. Yeah. Anyway, back to what you were saying when we were talking about Murderbot.
When we were talking about Murderbot, you brought it to my attention that it is sometimes included in that kind of cozy sort of, given that
milieu.
Yes, exactly. Not really being that familiar with what qualifies in that. You mentioned the Travis Baldry, which
the crappy not actually lesbians, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, capitalism will save us, legends and lattes.
Legends and lattes. See, there's the thing. Here's the problem. Brief aside. My brain barfs on the name Legends and Lattes and wants to go to Literature and Latte, because Literature and Latte is the company behind Scrivener. And so whenever the word latte comes in, my brain goes to, if it's a L and L, it just goes to Literature and Latte.
Sure.
Anyway, so I've never read anything that knowingly fit in that cozy category. As I was reading these, all I could think to myself is, I think this is cozy.
Really?
This to me felt cozy. Okay. Because all of the times where I kept thinking to myself, oh boy, something bad's going to happen on the next page and I don't want to turn it. Hey, guess what? Bad things didn't happen. It worked out. She did well. Things went pretty okay. And so with the exception of at the very beginning, the big bomb that gets dropped that kicks off, sort of what happens. For the most part, it just felt comfortable. And again, as I was reading it, I'm like, I don't know what's considered cozy, but this feels cozy to me because it was just it was comfortable. It was friendly. There's some weird things that I don't know if it's in the translation or whatever, where I'm like, you guys seem like friends and you're using these things that denote you consider each other like brother and sister. But then every once in a while you're just like, you stupid idiot or something like, like a little more harsh than I think it
conventions
felt like
of the
it should
genre.
have been.
Conventions of the genre for sure.
That kind of stuff. But overall, it just was. Again, for me, not being familiar with what widely is considered cozy, this felt very cozy. It was just...
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
No, it was a very good thing. It was enjoyable. It was calm. We don't have any big high stakes or whatever. This is a 17-year-old girl who is performing rakugo, however because I'm unfamiliar with this. This was a thing that was totally foreign to me. But
Sure.
That's just what it is. It's just this 17-year-old girl who wants to basically be a really good storyteller.
Yeah. But also, this is a sports manga. This is not a cozy manga. This is paced and feels like a sports manga, like Blue Lock or Haikyuu or things like that, where this is like, we've got to get the best at our sport. And so we've got to practice and learn new things so that we can always win. And sometimes they don't, but often they do. You are right there. Often they do. You do not see Akane really fail in these first 3 volumes. She gets it eventually. She has a real comeuppance to one of the characters who we meet in this series who kicks her ass at a competition. And it's great because I'm just like, I love it. But, I really like this series. I have gushed multiple times on this podcast about why I like Akane Banashi. And so I thank you for indulging me to allow me to reread these 3. Genuinely, as soon as I finished volume 3, I was at work and I was like, damn it, I'm at work. I can't go pick up volume 4 right now because it's at home. Because I just want to keep reading. I need to pop volume 4 open right now.
Sure.
Anyway, I'm going to give a quick synopsis of kind of what happens in this and introduce kind of what this is, what Rakugo is, why it's kind of being used in this, and then we'll talk a little bit about the details of what we thought about this. So as Peter mentioned, this Akane Banashi Banashi means tales or like stories, and Akane is the main character. So it's technically named like Akane's stories. And it is about this girl who wants to become a rakugoka, which is a person who does rakugo, which is this professional storytelling technique that goes back to like the Edo period of Japan, so hundreds and hundreds of years, where they basically tell these kind of funny, old-timey stories, usually old-timey stories, to just kind of relax people, to remind people about the past, to entertain, to impart morals sometimes. And it's just kind of like a storytelling technique that doesn't really exist in American culture. There's not really a good analog here for me to be like, well, it's kind of like this. The closest thing is kind of like not comedians, but like storyteller type people. Like not this guy because fuck Garrison Keillor, but Garrison Keillor. Like, that's the sort of thing, that's the closest American analog to Rakugo, is like a person who gets up there and is like, well, I'm telling stories about the past, and they're kind of funny, and they're homey, and they're just kind of feel, like you said, kind of cozy, and that's kind of the storytelling style. But in Japan, Rakugo is like a kind of big thing. It's not a really big thing. It is largely fallen out of style. It's not very, very popular or anything, but there's still practitioners who do it professionally, and there are still like venues that you can go to and watch it performed all day, every day. And Akane wants to do this because her dad is a rakugo, and that is where the book starts, is with her dad going up for his shinuichi promotion. So basically in Rakugo, there's a series of rungs that you have to climb to become more popular, to become better known, to be able to pull in bigger crowds, to perform at bigger venues. And her dad was at that second tier, Futatsume, and needed to do a promotional thing to become a shinuichi, that next tier up. And so he goes, he does his performance, and Akane just loves her dad so much. She thinks he's so great at Rakugo. But in this setting, the guy who is in charge of the Arakawa school, the school of Rakugo, of which Kane's father is partaking, says that none of the 6 men that performed are being allowed to move on, and they are all expelled from the school. So they can't even come back and try it again. So needless to say, her dad's like crushed. and just becomes, this was like his one last chance to try to make it in the world of Rakugo. And so then he just becomes like a salesman. But Akane still has that like burning in her heart. And so she starts training on the sly with her father's old master for the next 6 years until she's getting ready to graduate from high school. And that is when she's finally like pushing to become his pupil officially. And during that, he starts like introducing her to some of the other futatsumes in his like school. And she starts hanging out with these. And like you said, basically becoming like a younger sister to these older brother types who are there to teach her different aspects about Rakugo, why they do it the way they do it, what they think matters about this type of storytelling. And therefore, every time Akane is able to kind of grok something new and perform in a new way and grow as a performer, it's almost like she's Goku. And she is collecting brothers the way that Goku collects brothers and keeps getting more powerful. And she keeps going more and more Super Saiyan every time she does a competition because she just keeps getting better at it. Although she doesn't die in the first part of it, like Goku has died like 13 times over the course of Dragon Ball. That hasn't happened to her. She's still alive. But that's kind of the vibe of her like collecting brothers, almost uncles. It's like Uncle Palooza over here. She's collecting unks,
right,
to teach her how to be better at storytelling. And then the parts that we read today culminate in this kind of amateur competition of young Rakugoka. That's the name of people who do this type of storytelling, who all want to compete to become official, or not to only become official pupils, but to have an opportunity to have an interview with Isho, the guy who expelled her father. So she's like, I gotta win this. And so she goes up against these two particular characters who, if you keep reading, you will keep seeing. And those are Karashi, who is a guy who wanted to be a stand-up comedian. And then he was like, there's not actually that much money in stand-up comedy, and people think I'm a weirdo. I guess I'll go into Rakugo and tell stories in a different way than anyone else. And Hikaru, who is a professional voice actor, and who is like, I want to get to be known for the things I can do and not just being a pretty face and pretty voice. And so those three are basically going up against each other in this big competition. And the end of volume 3 ends with Akane telling this story that she has been tasked with telling, that she should absolutely lose with, because it's like a very basic story that everybody knows. And yet it seems like she's pulling it off at the very, very end. And spoiler alert for volume 4, she does pull it off.
Okay, because that was probably the worst part of the whole thing is I went and I'm sliding, pages on my iPad, and then I went and I tried to swipe to slide to another page, and I was like, wait, over. What? And then I tapped and I saw that I was at the last page. So I was disappointed that I was at the end.
But what that means is now you just go pick up volume 4. And the thing is, this comic goes over you like water. It reads so fast and so slickly.
I mean, each one of these volumes was like 170, 180, 190 pages.
Yeah.
And I read one Monday night, one Tuesday night, one Wednesday night. And we're talking like 45 minutes, 30 minutes.
45 minutes,
maybe?
half an hour. Yeah.
Yeah.
I read all 3 today in between meetings and stuff at work. Like, it's just fast. It just reads very fast. And the thing is it looks incredible. I think that Takamasa Mue is really talented, specifically in the faces. The way that he draws, the way that people are telling these stories, and has the people who are there telling the stories faces kind of mimic what is happening in the like storytelling realm on the page behind them, with these much thicker colors, thicker lines, much more exaggerated body shapes and artwork. And that is the way that the story is being told around these storytellers, but you still see it mirrored in their faces, or the ways that they're leaning, or the actions that they're making with their hands. I just think is really an interesting way to introduce you to this world that I also knew nothing about when I started reading this comic. And I think it does a really good job of introducing you to the idea, introducing you to these characters, and showing you a lot of different ways that people might approach Rakugo and why they might approach it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. What else did you think about it? What else did you like or were curious about or things like that?
Well, so I have to be honest and say that as far as I can recall, this is the only manga I've ever read.
No, I made you read Bride Story before.
Oh, that's right. Well, okay. These are the only 2 manga I've ever read.
Okay.
And so it was something that I was, like I say, and I think probably now that you reminded me, when we read Bride Story, it was probably the same thing where I just didn't quite know what I was getting into. And obviously I have read some comics, but it's mostly Marvel and DC stuff. And honestly, it was mostly when I was younger. I have not read much as an adult. There's some we read for this and some others that I've read at your recommendation. But it's a medium that I am mostly unfamiliar with. And so I just didn't quite know what I was going to get. And because, again, at least these 3 volumes just felt very comfortable, very, it was just like, it was relaxing to read that. And so I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun, to the point that I was just looking on Amazon and I'm like, okay, yeah, $70 to get all 11. I mean, the 11's not out. It's coming out on Kindle, and this would all be, to read them digitally, because I just don't have room for more actual physical crap in my life. But, I sat there looking at it going, I kind of want to just click buy now and get that. So I did. I quite enjoyed it. I definitely wanted to know what happened next and where the story goes when I got to the end of volume 3. And yeah, it was very enjoyable because, number one, it's an art form, a storytelling form that I'm not very familiar with. So it was fun to kind of dip into something that's different than my usual. It was about something that is completely foreign to me. Although, as I was thinking about it, and as you were talking about it, the name finally came to me. It made me think of, I remember our father listening on like weekends on NPR to A Prairie Home Companion.
Yeah, that was Garrison Keillor.
Yeah, and me thinking, golly, this is boring. But I was also a child at the time. But it was this thing that it's talking about Rakugo and not something I was familiar with. And so the idea that people are like, yeah, you can go to a place or that this is a thing where, hey, because one of the places she goes is like a retirement home. Mm-hmm. And she goes with some of the other folks. And it was a foreign idea in a medium that I don't have a lot of familiarity with, but still felt very comfortable and very enjoyable.
Yeah. Well, and it does, like I said, it does a really good job of like explaining in very plain words what's kind of going on here, while still using the titles of things. You still find out that it's called a Shinuichi or a Futatsume. It's not like changing the names, but it is explaining, here are the ranks that you have to work through in order to do this. Here are the expectations of when you do these things. And here are the, kind of pitfalls that you might fall into, and you might get stuck at this rank for a really long time, or maybe you'll get expelled, or maybe, and it builds a little tension there. But I do think that you point out really well, it does Akane doesn't really fail in any of the things that we read, or that we read for today. Like, she might do better than other times, but like, she figures it out, and she's always growing, and she's always getting better. And maybe that would make it like, it seems a little unrealistic, because you're like, there needs to be some stakes, right? Like, she's gotta beef it at some point. The question is, what's going to happen to this great rivalry that she is forming with Hikaru and Kurosami? It goes places. And let me tell you, More than anything in the world, I want Akane and Hikaru to kiss so bad because they build so much tension between those two characters as this book series goes on. And like, you get to know them better as well. Like, Akane is a girl whose entire life is just Rakugo. There's a scene in here where she gets called into like her teacher's office and her teacher is like, okay, you're a senior in high school. You got to start thinking about college. What are you going to do? And she's like, I'm going to become a Rakugoka. Like I've got a master lined up already. I'm going to go do Rakugo. And her teacher's like, dog, you can't do that. Nobody gives a shit about Rakugo. You got to do a real job. You got to go to college and get a real ass job. She's like, no, you can make me come in here every day and fill out these dumb forms with what you want me to do. And you know what I'm going to write on them? I'm going to write Rakugo. And I'll do it every day. If you're going to make me do this. And like, so this is all she has. Like, Rakugo is like her one true love, and it's all she cares about. And that's fine. That's interesting. Her dogged determination, her like single vision is part of what makes her so good at it. But it is also what makes it so interesting when you bring in some of these other characters. Like, Hikaru has so much other stuff going on in her life. She's a successful voice actor who everyone loves from this TV show she's on. And she has done some modeling and all this sorts of stuff. But she just is really passionate about this. And so she is doing this almost against the wishes of her management and all this sorts of stuff, because it's something that she's like, I want to test myself. For Akane, it's not testing myself. It's, I just want to do it because I can and I'm good at it and I believe in it. But for Hikaru, it's like, the stakes are high. I want to do this. And there's a part in volume 3, and I don't know how clear this was to you, especially as a person who hasn't read other manga. There's a part where Hikaru is on the phone with her mom, and she has like a country accent. Like, in the way that it's written, she's talking kind of like this to her mom. And you probably, that doesn't read to you as a thing, because this is a convention that is completely invented in like scans and translations of Japanese comics. That is to show that she was a bumpkin. She's a country girl. She's from some backwater. And when her back is against the wall, that comes back out. And that is an interesting thing about Hikaru, is that she comes from like nothing and has made this name for herself, but wants to keep making it in a new thing. And that is an interesting juxtaposition with someone like Akane, who has been set up for success, trained by one of the greats in the entire like performing art since she was 11. And so she's just positioned to be a superstar in a way that Hikaru isn't. And for that matter, the same is true of Karashi. Karashi is this guy who like hasn't really been trained. And so he does things like, well, nobody gives a shit about these stories about 1600s people. No one cares. I got to relate this to the present day, which was really interesting. During his storytelling, he touched on a story that one of the other people had done earlier in the volume about this person was making it like this doctor comes to talk to a monk and is like, hey, do you have Tarashi or Tarashi? I don't remember what the word is. You got gas. And the guy doesn't know what that word means. And so he goes and he bugs his younger monk dude to go figure it out. And the guy just invents something because he's like, I don't have a good answer. And so then he's telling the doctor, oh, yeah, I love that. I love having gas. I love farting. And then the doctor has to be like, dog, that was the word I was using means farts. So you just said I love to fart, bro. And so then when Karashi is telling that story, suddenly it's in the present day. And they're talking about like, whether or not the cows that this like multinational conglomerate takes care of are having good poops, and therefore bringing it into the modern day, which juxtaposes him really interestingly to Hikaru, who is trying to tell more traditional stories but with a lot of emotion in a very theatrical way, and Akane, who is like pure, uncut, traditional Rakugo. And I think it's really interesting how those three kind of are juxtaposed as rivals.
Yeah.
Anyway, what other thoughts did you have about this?
So one of the things I thought was interesting, and you mentioned with Hikaru, she at some point talks about she wants to do this. And I think it's when she's it's a scene where she's talking to her management. And they're basically, why are you doing this? This is dumb. This is a waste of your time. And she says, I don't want to just tell other people's stories.
Yeah.
You know, the words, yeah, I'm this famous voice actress and everything, but those words aren't mine. Those stories aren't mine. And so she wants to do this because even though she's telling known stories, as we see through Akane, and I mean, really all of them, but we see that what makes them effective in their own way is how they make the story their own. So you mentioned Akane gets tasked. So she wants to join this, what is it, the Karaku Cup or something like that?
Yeah.
So she wants to join that. She has to go to her mentor and she's like, I want to do this. And, you know, the guys that are with her that are, you know, all with the same master, they're like, oh, don't do it. He's not going to want you to. This is dumb. You know, you shouldn't be doing it, blah, 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 all these reasons. And he's like, okay, you can do it. But you have to use this story.
You have to do Jugamo.
You have to do Jugamo. And the whole idea behind that is just the fact that the kid gets a very incredibly long, goofy name. And so it's kind of, again, like you mentioned, everybody thinks of it as it's a very basic story. It's a very beginner story. There's no substance to it because the only thing that makes it funny is the repetition of this long, ridiculous name.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first time in the prelims, Akane is telling this, and it's all about her technical precision and the way how she gets to the point where she can say this name so well, so quickly and all this stuff. But everybody's like, that's cool. But what's she going to do for the final? She has to do the same story. And we get to that. And what it becomes is we get this scene, and I can't remember if it was kind of like a flashback. It feels like it was. But at some point, she's asking her mom, well, where did my name come from? And her mom explains that it was her dad and how he chose her name. And now all of a sudden, Akane has more meaning to her own name. And so she imbues that into her telling of the story and puts more meaning and more emphasis. Now the emphasis of the story isn't so much, I'm going to say this long, funny name really fast and without stumbling over myself. It's basically like a huge, long tongue twister. But instead, now it becomes she's telling the story because she understands that names have meaning and is kind of taking this basic story and imbuing in it her own sense of meaning. And so I thought that was a really interesting aspect where you see that's what Akane is doing. And Hikaru wants to do this so that for the same reason, so that she's telling stories, and sure, they're not her stories, they're these known stories, but she is making them her own as she's presenting them in a way that to her is very different than if she's just voice acting the lines in the story that somebody else has given her to say. While at the same time, and I can't remember his name, but the other guy, like you said, his whole approach is, again, he's taking these old stories and he's kind of making them his own in his own style in a way that because he isn't a rakugo, because he's coming at it as somebody else, that was what struck me, especially as I was reading the third volume, is this is all about taking these stories and making them their own. And it's as they make those stories their own, that's where they're finding their success.
Yeah, and they all, like you said, approach it from different ways, and so do the other people that we see. You know, when you see in that first volume, we see, God, what's his name? The guy who is super, super good, Kaise, who is like the big rising star that Isho has pulled underneath his wing, who is able to do like really seductive rakugo and like is specifically really good at making like really sexy ladies in the way that he tells stories, which again, it all is like, this is a little out of my cultural understanding. I cannot imagine it being sexy for this like 22-year-old twink to make sexy lady voice sitting on a pillow and like waving around a fan. Like, I don't get this, but like I fully understand this is a cultural difference. And that's how he approaches it, is by telling stories that are really like kind of sexy and seductive. And that is where his real talent lies. But then you meet someone like Kyoji, who's the first of the brothers, the older brother dudes, the other apprentices that Akane works with, who is told very early on in his career, he ain't funny. Like, he does not have the comedic timing for funny. So what he has is the comedic timing for too serious. And so he tells his stories too seriously. And that is what makes them funny. And so it's really interesting to see how they each approach it in different ways. You know, Koguma approaches it by studying everything, knowing the background of every single story, and therefore his is almost more professorial, as he is like imparting the actual tale itself rather than his own interpretation of it. And each of them just approach it in all of these very, very different ways. And it just is really, really interesting. You eventually meet some of the other like leaders of some of the other schools, like at the level of Isho and Shiguma. And like one of them is like this lady who was the first ever master at that level. And she comes on and she like the vibes on the page, like she has like evil aura vibes coming out of her. She's so cool. She shows up and you're just like, oh, so she's evil. I like her a lot. And it just works. And there's so many scenes like that. And again, the way that it's drawn, because you've never read any of these sports manga like Blue Lock or Haikyuu or things like that, you don't see how like when you get those like really kind of weird angled locked in faces with like the big eyes, that's when the volleyball boy is ready to hit that spike in a way that no one's ever spiked a volleyball before. Like that is explicitly the vibe they're going for here, is this very well-known, very well-trodden kind of area of sports manga, but taking it and doing it about this weird storytelling thing that no one really cares about in the 2020s. And I just think it's really masterful. And the thing that is maybe the wildest is just how fast it comes out. It comes out so fast. I know that it says that it's written and illustrated by one person each. I cannot imagine that's true. There's got to be an enormous team of uncredited like art support for Takamasa Mui, because like they put out a chapter almost every single week, dog.
Wow.
It is in Shonen Jump almost every week. After every 6 or 7, they take 1 week off and then it's back. And it's just crazy the speed with which this comes out, because it started in 2022 and there's already 17 volumes worth of manga out. That's wild to me. Bride's Story started in 2008 and 14 volumes of that have come out because Karumori takes her dang time.
Yeah.
And so it just comes out with like a wild clip, and it's just fun to read. I just really like it a lot. So thank you for indulging me. Any final thoughts before we wrap up here?
No, just that I really did. I found it it was just comforting. It was fun to read. Went by quick, and it was one of those where I would get to the end of a volume and I was surprised at how quickly I had gotten there.
Yeah, it just reads really nicely. So listeners, if you've never read a manga, this is a fine first one to read, honestly. Like,
yeah, it really was. I agree.
It reads really well. It looks incredible. It's really fun. And it's just a really good time all around. So thank you all for listening. We will be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. And until then, take care of yourselves.
Bye.